Locke and the Founders on Natural Rights, Lecture 2. In the last lecture, I talked about Locke's understanding of political power, the state of nature, natural liberty, and the law of nature. In today's lecture, in this lecture, I'm going to talk about Locke's understanding of natural equality, because of course Locke argues that in the state of nature, not only are we all free, but we are also all equal. We are all, in the words of the Declaration, created equal. And that raises a question. What does he mean by this? Because just as somebody could say, hey, Locke, your state of nature, this one where everybody's kind of, interacting with everybody else, but nobody's in charge, that doesn't sound natural to me. I don't see that happen anywhere. When I look around, I see rulers and ruled. I see people in charge. I see authority. Authority seems way more natural than anarchy. Right? You could raise that objection. So in the same way, Locke says, by nature, we all have a right to be free, to be our own master. And somebody can say, well, I don't know. I don't agree with that. Some people really do a much better job of using their freedom than others. So it doesn't make sense to say that everybody equally deserves to be free, because some people may make a mess of it. So you could object to that. And in the same way, you could object to the claim that people are by nature equal. You could say, that doesn't make sense to me. Seems to me, if anything, that by nature people are unequal in all sorts of ways, right? Different sizes, different strengths, different talents, different aptitudes, different moral characters, different abilities, even different luck. I mean, everything. That people are profoundly different and unequal in all sorts of ways. So how on earth can you claim that we are by nature equal? And this concern for equality, obviously, is a long-lasting concern in American politics, because the pursuit of equality, the understanding of human equality, is one of the most important principles that inform our politics up to the present day, where oftentimes we object to various forms of inequality on the grounds that we ought to all be equal. But what do we mean by that? What I claim is that when in the Declaration of Independence, the signers of the Declaration of Independence said that we are by nature equal, they had a very specific meaning in mind. And that's what I want to explain in this lecture, what they meant when they said that we were all created equal. Right? And the Declaration of Independence sort of famously declares that it's self-evident that we're created equal. And that claim, I think, is in large part derived from Locke's claim that human beings are by nature equal, or equal in the state of nature. And so the question then is, what does this equality consist of? How did Locke, how did the founders understand this natural equality? And again, as with some of the other principles, once you've understood what they meant, you still have to raise the question, were they right? But before you can ask yourself, are Locke and the founders right in saying that we're by nature equal? You first have to understand what they mean by that. So very early on, Locke asserts it. So in section 4, again, still on page 33, where he says the state of nature is a state of equality, wherein all the power and jurisdiction is reciprocal, no one having more than another. So there, the claim is that that nobody has any power over anybody else that they don't also have over him. In other words, that we're all equally free. I can't boss you around, you can't boss me around. And then, as we'll see later, and as you know from your reading, Locke does argue that human beings have the right to enforce the law of nature. So everybody has the right to enforce the law of nature, and I have the right to enforce the law of nature on you if you break it. But again, it's equal because you have the right to enforce the law of nature on me. So if I aggress against somebody in an unjustified way, you have the right to use force to restrain me. But if you unjustly aggress, I have the right to restrain you too. So it's still equal. We're all equally free, and we are all equally entitled to enforce the law of nature. And he gives a reason here in this section, where he says, there being nothing more evident than that creatures of the same species and rank, promiscuously born to all the same advantages of nature and the use of the same faculties, should also be equal one amongst another without subordination or subjection, unless the Lord and Master of them all should, by any manifest declaration of his will, set one above another and confer on him by an evident and clear appointment an undoubted right to dominion and sovereignty. Now, what he means there is something like that. When you look at human beings, you see, yeah, some people are stronger, some people are smarter. You've got a range of abilities and a range of aptitude, but there are no human beings that are just manifestly so superior to everyone around them that it is just clear that they ought to be in charge. So two human beings are still closer to one another than, say, a human being and like a cat, right? I mean, we all love cats. Well, actually, that's probably not true, but lots of people love cats. But it's quite obvious, I think Locke would say, that we are naturally superior to cats in such a way that it is not unjust to keep a cat as a pet, that kind of unequal relationship. Whereas it would be unjust to keep another human being as a pet, because you're not as different from them. You're not so clearly superior to another human being as you are to other animals. And so he says, so unless God directly intervenes and makes it clear this person, I've chosen this person to be in charge, which he claims has not happened, that then people should be free, since they are not so hugely naturally unequal to one another. Human beings basically should be free. But and you can see this language is actually echoed a little bit in the official statement on equality, number 2, which in this packet comes on page 66. The instructions from the Committee for the Province of Pennsylvania to the Representatives in Assembly. So 1774. Where they say, in fact, upon considering the primitive state of man, it appears most certain that the appellations of sovereigns and subjects, masters and slaves are unknown to nature. Nature has made us all of the same species, all equal, all free and independent of each other, and was willing that those on whom she has bestowed the same faculties should have all the same rights. So in other words, this claim for natural equality is in the first place a claim that there are natural distinctions between people. For Locke, the distinction between male and female is a natural distinction. The distinction between parent and child is a natural distinction. The distinction between the older and the younger, that's a natural distinction. It's based on natural characteristics. But the distinction between masters and slaves, the distinctions between rulers and ruled, those are not natural distinctions. Nobody is born to rule anyone else. Say we have the same nature and the same faculties. And by faculties, they mean the same basic abilities: speaking, reasoning, imagining. We're all endowed with the same nature. We're all endowed with the same faculties. And as such, we are basically equal, which makes it clear that by nature, it is not the case that the human race is divided into masters and slaves or rulers and ruled. So the distinction between ruler and ruled and master and slave, those are human inventions, not natural distinctions. Right, as Jefferson says in his letter to Waitman, it is not the case that some people are born with saddles on their back and other people are born booted and spurred to ride them. It doesn't work that way. So we are all equal in our freedom and in our kind of nature. But at the same time, this is consistent with the recognition that in many, 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 many ways, we are not naturally equal, right? It seems absurd, as I said before, to claim that human beings are naturally equal in every respect. And indeed, it seems quite self-evident that human beings are naturally unequal in almost every respect, in experience, in wisdom, courage, fairness, beauty, strength, height, talent, and the like. And Locke admits this in section 54, which in your packet comes on page 46. This is in the chapter on the authority of parents. And he starts by saying this in section 54. Though I have said above in chapter 2 that all men are by nature equal, I cannot be supposed to understand all sorts of equality. Age or virtue may give men a just precedency. Excellency of parts and merit may place others above the common level. Birth may subject some, and alliance or benefits others, to pay an observance to those to whom nature, gratitude, or other respects may have made it due. So parents and children and like. And yet all of this consists with the equality which all men are in respect of jurisdiction or dominion one over another, which was the equality I there spoke of as the proper to the business in hand, being that equal right that every man hath to his natural freedom, without being subjected to the will or authority of any other man. Right, and this is also reiterated in James Wilson in his that chapter on man as a member of society. He says, and this is usually the terms that he uses, when it comes to talent and when it comes to virtue, human beings are profoundly unequal. Some human beings are more talented and others less talented in all sorts of different pursuits. Like I could practice all day, practice piano all day, every day. I'll never be as good as Mozart. I'm just naturally, he is superior to me in music. So when it comes to talent and when it comes to virtue, moral character, people are unequal, right? So Locke and Wilson, who was himself a member of the founding generation, and even Jefferson and Adams in their lectures about the natural aristocracy, Locke and the founders all agreed that when it comes to talents and when it comes to virtues, human beings are unequal. And that's important, so that generally speaking, they thought that the people who hold public office should be superior, that they should be people who have great talent and great virtue, that they should be above average. And they have no problem with that. They think that that makes sense. It's good for the community if good and talented people are in charge. You want things that way. So yeah, we are not naturally equal in our talent or in our virtue. Nonetheless, we are in one fundamentally important sense naturally equal. And there's actually, there's a connection here. But so if the question is, in what sense are we naturally equal, according to Locke and the founders? The answer, which I read to you just a moment ago, is very clear. We are all equal in that we all equally have a right to be free. We all equally have a right to be our own master under the law of nature, not subject to the will of any other human authority. It is in that sense that we are equal. Or as Wilson says in his chapter, Man as a Member of Society, we are unequal in our talent and virtue, but we are equal in our rights and in our duties. So when the founders say we're created equal, what they mean is we're all equally endowed with certain natural rights, especially this right to liberty. That's the way in which we are equal. In every other sense, we're unequal. But that equality of the right to be free, that's really important. That's politically consequential. Because if it is true that we all equally have a right to be free, then that means that by nature, nobody is the master or ruler of anybody else. Right? That's what follows. Now, but again, this just raises the question we had before. Why should we believe this claim that everybody is equally entitled to be free? What reason can Locke offer us to believe this? And here I think actually the reasoning is made clearer by some of the readings from the founding. But you could say there are actually two reasons which combined give us an equal right to freedom. At the core of the idea is the fact that we're all human. We all share a human nature. And I mentioned, with Aristotle and with Hobbes before, that your understanding of human nature is very important for your understanding of politics. And here, the equal right to be free follows from the fact that we all possess the same nature, and that human nature has two important features for political consideration. So what is it about human nature that gives us a right to be free? Well, on the one hand, as human beings, we are all endowed with the faculty of reason. We are rational animals. The right to freedom presupposes reason. You have to be, in other words, an adult, somebody who has reached the maturity of their faculties to have the right to be free. As he says in section 55, children, I confess, are not born in this full state of equality. That is, they're not actually free, though they are born to it. Their parents have a sort of rule and jurisdiction over them when they come into the world and for some time after. But it is but a temporary one. The bonds of this subjection are like the swaddling clothes they are wrapped up in and supported by in the weakness of their infancy. Age and reason, as they grow up, loosen them, till at length they drop quite off and leave a man at his own free disposal. Right. So in other words, children do not actually have the right to be free. But the reason why is because they're immature. They haven't fully developed their reason. They have not reached the age where they are fully responsible human beings. And you have to be a responsible human being in order to have the right to be free. And this is what Locke means by having reason. He's not just talking about mere calculation. He's talking about maturity, the ability to be held responsible for your actions, which requires a certain degree of self-control and a certain degree of knowledge. He also reiterates this in section 61, which is on page 48 of your packet. It says, thus we are born free, as we are born rational, not that we have actually the exercise of either. Age that brings one brings with it the other too. So you're born free in the sense that as a rational being, you will have a right to be free once you reach maturity. So once you reach rational maturity, you have a right to be free. And this is why there are actually certain classes, he talks about this in section 55 and also in section 60. What this entails is that people who, for whatever reason, can never become fully rational or fully mature do not actually have the right to be free. He talks about children. So until you reach maturity, a child is not actually their own master. They are subject to their parents' authority. But then you have other people, and he calls them lunatics and idiots. Those are insults nowadays, but they're kind of technical terms at the time. Lunatic is 18th or 17th century English for what we would call somebody who's mentally insane. And an idiot is 17th century English for somebody that is mentally impaired. So what Locke is talking about is people who, either for reasons of insanity or some other sort of mental defect, are not capable of being kind of fully rational, fully in charge of themselves. And it has been recognized from time immemorial that people who are to a large degree, people who are mentally insane or people who are mentally impaired must be subject to some guardian for their own good. Right? Because the logic here is with children and the mentally impaired and the mentally insane, it is not good. It's not good for them, and it's not good for others to let them be their own master. It will be dangerous. They will be a danger to themselves. They will not be able to take care of themselves. They will be a danger to others because they can't actually handle being free. They don't have the capacity to be free yet. But Locke's idea is that, once, any average human being, and even most below average human beings, once they reach the age of 18 or so, you can basically hold them responsible for their actions. And so at that point, they are not subject to any other human authority. By right, they are in charge. So part of the reason why we have a right to be free is because, according to Locke, by virtue of having reason, each human being is capable of understanding and abiding by the law of nature. Right? When you reach maturity, you can understand what it means to, I need to preserve myself and I'm not supposed to harm other people. And you can assume that you know what that means, and you can assume that people can be held responsible for abiding by that rule. So if mentally and emotionally, like in terms of maturity, you're capable of understanding and acting according to the law of nature, then you're your own master. You don't need a master at that point. You're no longer subject to anyone. So part of the reason why you have a right to be free is because you have reason. But some people might say, well, so what? Aristotle agrees we all have reason, but that doesn't mean that there aren't superior people who should be in charge of everybody else. So why should the possession of reason lead to an equal right to be free? Because Aristotle recognized that we have reason, but he didn't think we had an equal right to be free. So this is where the second element of human nature comes in. And this element is what I refer to as fallibility or imperfection. Now, this consideration of imperfection or fallibility, not infallibility. Infallibility means not making mistakes. Fallibility means you are subject to making mistakes. You are imperfect. And the importance of fallibility or imperfection is not something that comes out of Locke's work, or it's not really brought up by Locke, but it's something that's made very explicit with a number of the founders, especially in those official statements on equality, which in your packet are on pages 66 and 67. So the argument is this. Only God has a natural right to exercise absolute authority over others. God's authority over human beings is unlimited, and it's not based on our consent, right? God is not in charge because we told him he could be. God is in charge because he's God and we are not. And in particular, what this means is God is entitled to absolute rule over all other beings because of his perfection. And this is official statement number 1. Supreme or unlimited authority can with fitness belong only to the sovereign of the universe, God. And that fitness is derived from the perfection of his nature. As you can see in number 2 from 1774, There is none but God alone that has of himself, and in consequence of his nature and perfections, a natural, essential, and inherent right of giving laws to mankind and of exercising an absolute sovereignty over them. Or as made clear in the Essex result, number 3, and this is the clearest one. The reason why the supreme governor of the world is a rightful and just governor and entitled to the allegiance of the universe is because he is infinitely good, wise, and powerful. His goodness prompts him to the best measures, his wisdom qualifies him to discern them, and his power to affect them. So in other words, God's entitled to absolute authority because it is better for everybody to be subject to God. God is all good. That means he wants what's best for everything. Not only does he want what's best, he's all wise, and that means he can figure out what that is. So not only does he want to do what's best for all, he knows what's good for all. And he's all powerful, which means he can do it. So he wants what's best, he knows what's best, and he can do what's best. Everybody else, for their own good, ought to give absolute and complete obedience to God on those grounds. He knows better than you what's good for you. He wants what's good for you more than you want it. He's more able to achieve it than anybody else. So any being that's all good, all wise, and all powerful is absolutely entitled to be in charge of everybody else who's imperfect. But the thing is, no human being can claim to have those features. No human being can say, hey, you should do what I say, right? And you say, well, why? Why should I do what you tell me to do? And if I responded, well, because I'm all good, all wise, and all powerful, then you know that I'm a liar, because no human being can claim to be all good, all wise, and all powerful. And what that means then is that, because human nature is imperfect, right? We're not always wise. We don't always know what the right thing to do is. We're not always good. We don't always want to do the right thing. And even when we know what the right thing is and we want to do it, we're not always actually able to bring it about. And so in that sense, although by virtue of our reason, we are entitled to be our own masters. I know what, I'm mentally competent enough to abide by the law of nature. Therefore, I have the right to be in charge of myself. So everybody has enough reason to be in charge of themselves, but nobody is so perfect that they can claim a right to rule others without their consent. I can't come along and say, I am by nature so obviously superior to you that you owe me obedience whether you like it or not. No human being can claim that kind of right to govern, because no human being can claim to be perfect enough to exercise that authority well. And so for Locke, there are two options. Either somebody else is your master or your own, or you are your own master, right? But because you have reason enough to be your own master, and nobody else is perfect enough to claim that they should be your master. So basically, you are in charge of yourself. You are rational enough to govern yourself, but you are imperfect enough that you're not entitled to govern others. So this is the way it works. We are equal in our right to be free. We are equal in our rights because we are equal in our nature, in the sense that we have reason that allows us to be our own master, but we are fallible and thus not trustworthy masters of others. Right? So because of our nature, because of our rational but imperfect nature, we have the right to be our own master, but not the right to be the master of anybody else. So that's how our natural equality gives us a natural right to be free. And because we have that natural right to be free, it follows, therefore, that the state of nature, or our natural condition, is one of anarchy, where nobody has the right to govern anybody else. So that's the way these rights fit together. Okay. Now, again, Locke is not saying that we actually enjoy these rights. In point of fact, because of human imperfection, anarchy doesn't work. Human nature makes anarchy dangerous. So even if you have the right to be free, that right won't be respected. That's why Locke thinks governments need to be instituted. But here he's talking about rights. And because of our nature, Locke argues we have a right to be free under the law of nature, and we don't have the right to govern anybody else. Now, there's another important right, and that's the right to property. And that's what we're going to get to in the next lecture, because this is an important part of Locke's thought, the right to property. That is, Locke is really one of the only philosophers, one of the major political philosophers, who argue that we, by nature, have a right not only to life, under the law of nature, we have a right to preserve ourselves, and a right to liberty, we have the right to be our own master, but also that we have a right to private property by nature. So that's what we'll get to in the next lecture.